I remember accepting Jesus into my heart when I was about 3 years old. As we went to church every Sunday, I was involved in Awana for nearly a decade, Bible in church camps. I went to a private Christian school. I was checking off all of these boxes, but the things that mattered I wasn't actually doing. And I think a lot of that came from just not understanding what a relationship with God was. And then as I got older, for a variety of reasons, I started to have these thoughts of, well, why is this going on in the world, God? Or like, why isn't my dad Christian? So things that started to weigh on me. And as I got older, instead of facing that, I started to just dissociate from it and push it away. And I came to the University of Utah to get my degree in musical theater. And I was putting my identity into musical theater and directing. I had years of being involved in theater and music and competitions and shows and all those things. So that is what I poured myself into, was my degree. So that when my senior year rolled around, 6 weeks before graduation was March of 2020, when COVID shut everything down. Everything that I had put my identity into was ripped away from me with no warning and not even time to process. And I hit a breaking point in October of 2020 when I was physically exhausted, mentally exhausted. I was working 2 part-time jobs that I didn't like. I was investing myself in relationships that weren't healthy, and I'll never forget, it was late October and I just broke down in my apartment and I was just sobbing because I just had nothing in my mind. And for the first time in I don't know how many years, I just remember thinking, God, I just need a break. Like, I just need some time. In God's sense of humor, I test positive for COVID, and that meant that I was alone for 10 days in my apartment. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't go out and do anything. I was by myself. And I took a lot of those 10 days to just really start to think about, okay, I am a Christian. What does that mean? I started trying to go back to church that following spring, but I'd started working a job where I had to teach almost every single Sunday. My friend Jordan Peterson and I've been messaging back and forth on Instagram a couple times about Bible things or verses that she'd posted. So if anyone says social media can't bring you back to God, they're a liar, because for me it did. She invited me to go check out her church with her, and I was like, oh, I work on Sundays. I don't think it's gonna work. And she goes, oh, we meet on Saturdays. And I think, I can do Saturdays. And so I started coming tentatively back to K2. I'd been kind of burned by a church in the past. And I had this relational church trauma that I'd had from these Christians in college. So there was a lot of trepidation coming back to a church. And I didn't feel at first like I was that plugged in. And I was just thinking, like, God, why am I here? Like, no one cares about me. I don't feel like I'm a part of a community. I don't know if I'm going to come back after tonight. And that night, after church, Mariah Nelson comes up to me and she invites me to go out to dinner with a group of people after church. And I remember thinking, okay, that's interesting that this is the day that I'm invited out. And I remember thinking throughout that entire evening, I felt like I was a part of a community immediately in that evening. This community I hadn't felt I'd had in 10 years. So February of this year, I go down to Texas to this worship night. When I got back from Texas, I had recommitted myself to going fully into my pursuit of God. I had applied for this college ministry position about the same time. In the time I was going through the interview process, I had felt this strong calling to be working in a ministry setting. And so when I didn't get it, I felt, okay, what's next? I'm going to do a 3-day fasting and prayer session over what God wants from me in ministry. Before breaking the fast, I feel like I have no answers whatsoever. I'd emailed the gal I'd interviewed with a few weeks prior about, hey, was there any reason I didn't get it? Anything I should know? I had gotten an email back from her, and she essentially had said, you were a phenomenal candidate. We just wanted someone who had been involved in this ministry in college for the position. That's a completely valid reason, and that felt like the validation to keep pursuing a path down towards ministry, whatever that may be. So I go back to these emails about the different serving opportunities at K2. And what caught my attention was I had an email from one of the youth pastors about working with the student ministry. And lo and behold, I noticed the name of the pastor for the first time, which is Bryson, which was this name of the gal who I'd been interviewing with for this college ministry position. So in my mind, I thought, okay, God, I see you. And fast forward to now, I've been able to work with so many wonderful students and go through life with them. And even in the relatively short time I've been able to do that, I've watched so many incredible transformations happen. And when I first felt called to working in ministry, I reached out to a friend back in Seattle who runs a women's ministry, and she completely called me out on, if you want to be working in ministry, you need to be discipling and you need to be discipled. And I had zero idea how to make that happen because I didn't have anyone back in Seattle that I had an established relationship with, and I didn't really have anyone here in the same way. 2 weeks after I had that conversation, Rachel Wilford texts me out of the blue and asks me if I've been plugged in at K2, and I say, yes, I have been. Thank you so much for reaching out. Keep in mind, I had no idea who Rachel was at this time. I just have a text from someone I don't know. And then she then texts, well, if you have any questions about discipleship, I'd love to answer them. And a light bulb goes off again. Oh, I'd been praying for someone to disciple me, to be mentoring me. And just once again, seeing how in the right moments, at the right times, when my heart was open to it, these people and these situations have come into my life, not when I wanted them to, but when I was ready for it. To even look back 1 year ago and see where I am now, I can't help but just be floored at how much God moves, not only when you release control, but when you have your eyes open and you're just seeing it around you, seeing the little prayers that are answered, the big prayers that are answered. I know that I also have a community now that I can work through those things with. I can talk about these things with, and I can be honest about these things with. And that's been one of the most beautiful things looking back on my story, is how I essentially went from nothing at all to having so much fulfillment through God in 12 months.